Yes, so I think if we go on to... We're live. There you go. Should we sit there and then we can get up when we're ready?
Yeah. All right, we will make a start. Good evening. Thank you so much for coming out. It's really, really lovely to see so many faces here and in person. And good evening to everyone watching online as well. There's a little camera at the back. And it's on demand, so everything we talk about will be available to watch, listen back at a later date. And there is a chat feature as well. So if you have questions and you're watching on YouTube on the StreamYard, then please do pop questions in there, and hopefully we'll have a bit of time to come back to them at the end. But if not, we will make sure we send out the answers. So welcome to Upper 5 talk. I'm joined by Mrs. Hawkes, our Academic Director of Middle School, and Mrs. Minton, our Pastoral Director of Middle School, and you'll hear much more from them as we go through. We just wanted to start the year off with an opportunity to give you the field for any questions you might have, but for us to tell you how we're going to support the Upper 5 in everything they've got coming up over the next year. And the next year, which is actually going to be 2 terms once we consider study leave and exams. So it's going to go pretty quickly. So just going to start by talking about the shape of the year. I'm going to invite Mrs. Hawkes up to talk us through this. And there's a few bits on there. And we went through this, so for the Upper 5s that are here, we went through this on Tuesday as well. So some of this will be familiar to you.
Thank you. Yes, thank you. Thank you for joining us here and online. This is obviously very much an abridged version of the calendar, but just has some key pointers for you for things to look out for. Most prominently looking at how we support and also challenge your daughter as she goes towards her GCSEs. We're going to be focusing mostly today, obviously, on Autumn 1, because that's where we are right now. So that's this first half term. And in a minute, I'll talk a little bit about the first event that we're looking towards at the moment, which is 5 to 6 Day, which is on Wednesday, October the 5th. But if you look, as we're looking at the year, you can see, obviously, Mr. Williams just alluded to it, but of course, it is a very condensed year. Most of the work, most of the content of your courses your daughters are studying will be complete towards the end of this term, with only perhaps a few things to be focused on and revised after mocks. So bearing that in mind, this term can feel quite condensed. It's also the term that preludes mock exams, which are after Christmas. But I think you can see from here, and we'll talk a little bit more about these elements that we have in place. Hi, welcome, come on in terms of supporting your daughter towards, firstly, the mock exams, and then, of course, the real things, which will start likely around the week of the 15th of May. So let's start with 5 to 6 transition. So over the next fortnight, and actually starting from yesterday when we first spoke to your daughters about 5 to 6 transition, we have a number of events and opportunities for them to engage in order to shape and refine the choices that they make. Not now, they're not making their A-level choices now, of course not, but certainly they get an opportunity in 2 weeks' time to have some taster lessons. So they will actually go round to timetabled lessons with the sixth form teachers, and they will be taught a lesson, not just in the style, but also the content of some of their subjects of interest. Now, in order to help them make those initial decisions, what do I want to see? Because, of course, they can't see every single, there are 27 subjects on offer. They can't see every single subject in a day. But hopefully they will have already embarked upon a personal journey where they will have thought about those areas of interest, those subjects that they are keen to look at, particularly if they're new subjects they've never experienced before. In order to support them with that, we have already offered them an opportunity to have an optional meeting. They don't have to do this, but with one of the members of the senior staff or sixth form team. In particular, we've given them a group of 11, 12 teachers in the school who are particularly focused on those transitioning points, both between fifth form and sixth form, and of course then sixth form and higher ed, and all the other options that are available to them. And the staff include the careers advisor, who is also available for that conversation. Mr. Williams will talk about that in a second. On the taster day itself, you will obviously receive some information about this in advance, but they obviously will go round to each of the lessons that they have opted in to see. They will have an opportunity to spend some time in the lovely sixth form centre, sort of feeling what it is like to be a sixth former. And whether or not your daughter has decided to stay with us, and we very much hope that she will, welcome, or even if she's already decided or you're looking elsewhere, we really have encouraged all of them to be involved and take the opportunity to experience these things that we're putting on, because the advice that they're getting from our specialist teachers is obviously relevant to any sixth form setting. And they are going to make these decisions about wherever they're going next year. They will make those decisions with us this year, and we want to make sure that we're preparing them really well for what's to come. Would you mind talking about the academic consultations? Thank you.
So I'll just give you a second to read that. Now, Upper 5 will have noted this was set out on their Google Classrooms this morning or yesterday. And as Ms. Hawke says, she has really helpfully set this up, which is going to be a really useful tool. And it is optional, but we'd encourage pupils to get stuck into this, particularly if they are thinking about things like Oxbridge or Ivy League universities, or if they want more information about apprenticeships, if they're looking at Russell Group universities, to have a look at this form and to speak to one of our fantastic sixth form team or senior management team. So there's a whole host of staff up there who they can speak to. And what's really good is, because of the wide breadth of staff that have volunteered their time to help here, they could target the Upper 5 could target their questioning to specific members of staff. So, for example, Mrs. Barrett does a lot about Oxbridge, as does Ms. Thompson, so that could be really useful for them. Miss Coe would be a fantastic person to speak to if they're thinking about apprenticeships as well. So a real diverse group there. And please do encourage your daughter to have a look at that and to get stuck into that. And a few pupils have, which has been fantastic. So that'll be happening over the next few weeks, and that'll be really useful in guiding their kind of path, if you like, to make sure they're working towards what they want to achieve. I can see a couple of us kind of making notes and stuff, which is fantastic, but just a reminder, this will all be recorded, so don't feel like you have to write anything down. All these slides will be available to you as well. And all the Upper 5s have got access to this form in particular as well, so they can show that to you. Now, mock exams. So hopefully, Upper 5s, we're not fearing the word mock exams. This shouldn't be a scary thing. I don't want you to be intimidated by it. Mock exams are a really useful and important stepping stone in our journey towards achieving success in our GCSEs. And we're going to kind of ease you into that as best as we can. Now, we had our summer exam period, which happened in June, which we were really fortunate to do as close to a proper exam setup as possible in the 10 days that we had. And we finished with our maths paper on the last day in the main hall, which was exactly as a real GCSE would be. So a really good experience for them to have that. Now, we're going to get everyone in Upper 5 into the sports hall, and for some that can be quite a scary environment, even though they're in the sports hall all the time, but as soon as you put some exam desks out, it becomes a very different beast. So we're going to do some mocktails, and what that involves is getting them sat in the sports hall, and giving them a nice fruity drink with absolutely no alcohol, of course, and getting them sat down so they can do a past paper in that setting, and so they can go through the normal process that would happen in an exam, with all the little bits which we might not think about, so including queuing up outside in alphabetical order, walking in silence, Miss Coe, our head of examinations and head of careers, talking us through the process of exams, so writing your name down, making sure you're not copying, making sure you have the right equipment and all that stuff. So really little things which potentially we've not had huge amounts of practice, particularly because we've had a couple of COVID-interrupted summers and not done so many exams, which will be really, really useful. So we've got that coming up. The next thing is revision workshops. So as well as having a whole host of subject-specific revision sessions, so for example, I know geography has just started on a Wednesday lunchtime, and all departments and faculties will be running some sort of revision session or some sort of extra support. There will be sessions which teachers will deliver, which students can opt in for guiding pupils, guiding the upper five and helping them with their revisions. So that could be specific things like essay writing or time management as well. And we found that they were really appreciated when we did them with the previous upper five cohort. Twilight testing is similar. What that is, it's kind of a study period, if you like, after school, which pupils, again, can opt in for. They can take a past paper and or some revision, but we'd encourage it to be a past paper so that it's kind of a realer experience. Is realer a word? A more real, Miss Hawkes is like, no. A more real experience, and they do that in exam conditions. So just, again, just getting them used to being in exam conditions and being working and having to recall information in that sort of setting. So they've got loads of opportunities to do it. And what will ultimately happen, what we hope will happen, is exams will become a little bit boring and they just become really normal. And that actually upper five can just smash them, and it's another day in the office. It's just a new way for them to show how capable they are, which we all know they really are. We've got a fantastic tutor team, and throughout the year we will be encouraging the pupils to reflect. We'll be supporting them in that. We'll be making sure that they're getting loads of help in that, and revision as well, which we'll come back to in just a minute. And lots of what we do is about, it's a real formative process. So the mocks for us inform us where the pupils are at, what we need to maybe do more of, or what they're actually really strong on. And it's just a constant feedback loop, which is going to be really, really useful for us and for the upper fives as well. And then on meaningful results, and just why the mocks are really important, I think I'll let Miss Hawkes, if you want to talk about this one, just in terms of how our mocks might help us in terms of sixth form entry and progressing on to further study there. All right.
Thank you. So, broadly, a simplification, Headington, our requirements for sixth form study to open up a curriculum of A-levels is 3 grade 7s. And those 3 grade 7s need to be primarily in the subject which is being either continued or in what we call facilitating subjects. Now that is a live link for the pupils so they can see the full list of facilitating subjects, but it looks a little bit like this. This is one page of it. Essentially a grade 7, either in the subject itself or in the case of a new subject where it's not offered at GCSE, it is a grade 7 in a facilitating subject, which means it's a subject which gives a great foundation and allows an easeful transition onto the A-level course from GCSE. Some of the highlights, if you like, from this list, and some of the things which come up quite frequently, because we have some incredibly gifted and aspirational scientists predominantly in at Headington, and so one of the key things for those people who are really keen on science, and we do tremendously well in science here, of course, as we do in all subjects, but is that they will need, if they want to study a science, they need a grade 7, not just in the science itself, but also in maths. And psychology is a science, and it's often very popular as an option. And pupils need to be aware that they will require a 7 in a science and in maths to study psychology at A-level here. There are some suggestions of things that we could definitely negotiate on, and that's what I wanted to mention next. But one thing we really don't want to negotiate on is A-level physics, because A-level physics needs to be accompanied with A-level maths. It is very, very difficult to study A-level physics without A-level maths supporting. So those are just some highlights, and there'll be lots more information on this, so please don't worry about retaining all of this right now. But the main point I wanted to make in terms of facilitating subjects and also our entry requirements for sixth form is that, and if I can try to find a positive from the last couple of years of as you said, COVID interrupted learning and the processes we've had to go through internally, and not just to assess our pupils, but also to facilitate their goals and aspirations in their next move, either from GCSE to A-level or A-level and beyond, is we have had to look at acknowledging that we have had to grade them internally, and that has meant recognising their worth and the achievements that they have made throughout the course, not just in the summer exams. And so what I mean by this is that because we have, not least in 2020, or 2021 indeed, when we had to calculate those grades, we had to use the evidence not just of perhaps because the exams weren't actually sat in the summer, but evidence of what that pupil had been demonstrating before. We are keenly aware that natural fact, if we have graded somebody at, say, grade 8 or 9 in a subject during mock exams or throughout the course, and on those occasions, we are aware that just occasionally it doesn't come off on the day. For some reason, that final exam, they missed the mark. We have, over the last couple of years, certainly recognised the worth of those pupils and the fact that we have graded them previously and we have seen their worth as a candidate throughout their course, and we have allowed them to take on that A-level course. In particular, if they were particularly close to, say, a grade 7 in maths, they had done previously very well, it didn't come off on the day. That, for example, is a situation in which we have allowed access to that science that they so desperately wanted to take at A-level. Part of the reason for making this so explicit to you now is because if we look at the successes, which we will in a minute, that we have seen in previous years and in the last couple of years, and of course this year, that has been built in part, not actually, as perhaps some of the media outlets would have you think, on sort of playing a game, but because the pupils have had a really strong sense that everything that they are doing throughout the year, not just that last minute sort of cram before an exam, but everything that they have been doing matters. And that meant that particularly last year, we laid a great deal of emphasis on the mock exams. We were very unsure still, thank you, Boris Johnson, etc. But we were very unsure whether the exams would take place. We were told we needed a contingency plan. We needed to keep testing them. We needed data. We had to be very explicit with last year's pupils, and we had to test them early, and mocks would potentially count. They did exceptionally well in their mocks. And that was brilliant. Brilliant for them, not just because it was potentially a data point, but brilliant because it gave a really easeful journey towards the summer. There was no child, there was no girl here who was relying on cramming all of her 2 years' worth of work into the Easter holidays or the few days before each examination. She was working consistently throughout, and the mocks mattered. And in fact, the mocks mattered a great deal because it also allowed a small number of people to access to A-levels that perhaps they might not have been able to if we'd have been going on that final exam mark. That does not mean that we're encouraging the pupils to in any way fail their exams. It is just taking the best of what we've learned from the last couple of years, and I hope that you will agree that that will be a strong motivator for our pupils. There's been a great deal in the press about how independent schools have been playing a game, that they made the most of being able to assess their pupils internally in some ways that they, in some ways we're trying to flout the rules. And I can see, and I hope by being completely explicit with you, I hope that you can see that we actually got our highest proportion of grade 9's highest results ever in terms of the highest grade this year. Not last year, not the year before. And that really makes me intensely proud, not just because they are excellent results, because they did really well and they've done better than they've ever done before here, but because also it really shows that we have great integrity in our internal marking. We have great confidence that we are assessing them completely accurately. And we in no way were playing a game. These results are real, and as you can see, it's onwards and upwards. And with that in mind, I showed this to your daughters earlier this week, and I said, They have it all at their fingertips. I would love to foresee almost half of all of their grades, the hundreds of grades that they will be awarded next summer, could possibly be that very highest grade. I want them to be aspirational. I want them to be ambitious. I want them to challenge themselves, and I want them to do that from this moment. They responded really positively to that. They are really motivated. They are really keen on success. They're making the most of their study periods. They're already working together. They are a joy, your daughters. Just because I can't help but also mention, our A-level results, which were equally stunning, and again tell the same story. We have confidence in what we're delivering here. No one is playing a game. We are teaching your daughters to the highest level, and we are assessing them accurately, and we are putting them on a path to ultimate success. So they should stay with us. What's the secret of success? So many things. But I said these things to the girls earlier this week. Obviously, focused and varied revision methods, and Mr. Williams will talk a little bit more about some of the things we've already told them about that, and things that we will obviously tell them again, and that you can reinstate and reaffirm at home. We're not suggesting they need to start revising everything right now. Of course not. They're having new content delivered in their lessons. They need to be focusing on completing their courses. But as and when they are coming to that point of revision, which will be drawing towards the end of this term, they do need to think about the ways in which they are revising. And we help them a great deal with that, and we will share that with you in a minute. Regular testing in class and at home is really effective. Not high-stakes testing. We don't want to stress them out, as we say all the time. They need to be testing themselves. There's no way that they can learn anything by reading something and then going back and then highlighting it and reading it again. They need to be shutting that book in the simplest terms possible. They need to be testing that they have retained information. And with that in mind, there will be in-class tests in the run-up to the mocks, but they're there for a good reason. And so if it occasionally your daughter may come home and go, I've had a chemistry test and then and I'm about to go into mocks. But please do be reassured that whilst we don't want to over-test them, that regular testing intervals are really helpful in preparation for these big exam series. Obviously, we talk to them about forward planning. We're really encouraging them to be independent learners who have empathy with their future selves, but also are able to organise themselves and to think about the time that they have. And that's something we work a lot with them on over the coming weeks and terms. We have in the past, and again, I'll let Mr. Williams talk about that as well, but we will be working with them to create revision timetables both before the mocks and, of course, before the GCSEs. We'll be encouraging them to take the driving seat, though. They know what they have on. They know what their commitments are. They know what they're doing each week. They know what family commitments, indeed, you'll have over your break. And so they will be very much in the driving seat, but they need to make sure that the goals that they're setting and the schedule that they're creating, they stick to. And so being open and honest and sharing that with you so that you can help to support them is one of the keys to success. One of the wonderful things, and it's covered here now, this black and white photo which I found was actually of the Lee Library back in the 1960s, I think. The Lee Library is a beautiful space. It's the middle school hub. It's right above the entrance to the school in the reception. We've had it for a couple of years now. I'd say that the last year's Upper Five made the best use of it I've ever seen. Even during their leave, they were often coming into school to work together, to test one another, to help each other revise. There was a real sense of a real sort of collegiate coming together of the community. And this image here is actually something which was posted online, I think on one of our Twitter accounts. It was because we have these enormous boards up there, just old whiteboards actually, and the girls were making use of them. They were creating these this was absolutely enormous resource that was created by a number of different pupils who were all revising the same paper at the same time. I think that's why they did so well. Not the only reason, but I do think that teamwork was something that we really impressed upon them, and it was a beautiful thing to see. The last point on here, of course, is something that Mrs. Minton will talk about briefly towards the end, but really building in that personal balance for well-being, thinking about the way that they're treating themselves, and really making sure that their mental health and their physical health is primary in all that they do. I'm going to pass on to Mr. Williams, who's going to take you through some of the things that we've already told the girls quite briefly.
Thanks, Ms. Fawkes. I was going to brag and say that this image up here is my P group, and I'm really proud of them. However, I've just seen the image of the body in the top right, and that's not what a human body looks like. So I'm a little bit concerned about they went into the exam with that, but they got away with it. They did really well. Absolutely adore the Upper Five. They are a fantastic bunch. They are a really good bunch. I don't mind saying they're a pain in the neck sometimes. They do stretch us, but they are a really good bunch. And I hope they're approaching this year with a real sense of excitement. Yes, nerves are fine. I think it's so normal to be nervous about your GCSEs because that shows that you care, shows that you want to do well. But I hope there's a real feeling of excitement and a real can-do attitude because they are so capable. And so many of them have already achieved really fantastic things and will go on to achieve brilliant things. And we're all here to support them in that endeavour. Now, last year in the summer term, I think the first half of the summer term, we did quite a bit of stuff with the Upper Five in tutor time about revision. And we went through a whole host of things. So you can see some of the slides here which we shared with the pupils. And I won't go into them in too much depth because, again, the pupils have these and you'll have access to these as well. But I think it's really useful for parents for you to see what sort of things we've been saying to the pupils. And hopefully the Upper Fives in the room are looking at this like, yeah, I remember it. And a not blanked face. And Daisy's frowning a little bit, but maybe Daisy didn't use this one. So this is what revision is, to look at it again. And the key thing is about active revision. So making sure, like Mrs. Hawke says, we're not just reading a book, but actually we're looking at ways to regurgitate information. That's really important. So that might involve doing some Q&A with your friends. It might be that we try and write it from memory. So we've read something, we've done it in class, we've done a bit of homework on it, and actually we're trying to attack some questions from our memory. But trying to regurgitate it in active ways is really important rather than just highlighting or listening to something, because there's a place for that and that can be useful, but the bulk of our revision has to be active. Now, the Upper Five, this drives me a little bit mad, but they make so many beautiful things, and that can actually be a really good way to revise. So by changing the work, by changing the format it's in, can be really good. So it might be, we've got some things here, it could be diagrams, it could be label drawings, all sorts of things which they could change the work. But what's really important here is that it's active. So this encourages them to regurgitate the information in different ways. Okay? And hopefully you will have seen some of this, around the house. You would have seen some of their lovely revision work which they have created. Now, really importantly, yes, make something beautiful, but we just can't get caught up in spending 4 hours colouring in, because that becomes not revision if we're just doing that. And some of the Upper Five are a little bit guilty of that at times. So there is a balance to it. There is a balance to it. It doesn't need to be perfect. Better done than perfect. But there's a whole list of things there. So again, just different ways to change the information, to regurgitate the information, to make sure we're solidifying it in our long-term memory there. Challenge. So we work best when faced with a challenge. I'm going to speed that up a little bit. And you can see there's a few things here which we spoke about with the Upper Fives as well. And lots of them kind of do good revision techniques subconsciously without even thinking about it, but being aware of what works for them will be really useful as well. So if they find a revision technique which they really like, and that could be subject specific, or it could be for an essay subject, or it could be for science, whatever it might be, that's fine. That's really good if they know that, and then to keep going forward with that. So if we look back to Lower Five, when they were right at the beginning of their exam sitting journey, if you like. That doesn't sound like the most thrilling journey, but thinking about them sitting exams for their GCSEs and then possibly A-levels and maybe university and various qualifications in the workplace as well, they are going to just get better and better and better once they start learning about which revision works for them, how their environment, their physical environment is when they're learning as well. And we've said at the bottom there, we encourage the girls to set lots of targets, and we're always talking about SMART targets, so making sure it's a real goal which they can measure, which is achievable, and which they can look back on as well. And treats, very importantly, and we do try, and encourage the girls to take a really holistic approach to their studying and to just their general lifestyle. I'm a huge believer in balance, and I think success comes from balance. When we've got exams, when we're busy, when we've got different bits going on, we can't stop doing everything else, because that's not real life. We wouldn't do that if we had something coming up in the workplace. Absolutely prioritise, and absolutely there has to be sacrifice at times, but there still needs to be balance there. I wrote these, so I don't know what that says about me. These are the things which I like to do. I'm big on yoga. Upper 5 know I love my yoga. Puppies, really good stress reliever. I asked Mrs. Jordan if we could get a therapy dog. Hasn't happened yet, but we're going to keep pushing with that. Not for the Upper 5, more just for me. But the Upper 5 will have their own things which work for them as well. And that could be a treat in the conventional sense, or it could be a really small thing. It could be actually just taking some time off, chatting with your sister, or it doesn't need to be anything complicated. If it works, then that's fantastic. That's job done. I'm glad we're having a laugh at my treats. Mobile phones when we're revising. Oh my gosh. Sometimes the Upper 5 will be revising and there'll just be a phone just out of reach, and it's just buzzing the whole time. Snapchat, it's got to go. Just put your phone elsewhere. What I used to do when I was revising was to give my phone to my mum. Now, for some people, that is their absolute worst nightmare, and fine. But put it in the bathroom, put it in another room. Make sure, at the very least, it's not on silent. Now, I love my smartwatch, and it's fantastic, but it buzzes every time I get a message. So if that's you, turn it on Do Not Disturb. Leave it in another room as well. You probably don't need it to measure your heart rate whilst you're doing your maths revision. Okay? But just thinking about the physical space we're working in as well. Now, for the most part, and I'm making a generalisation, but for the most part, we're really fortunate that we have got spaces which we can study in, which are quiet and are away from annoying siblings or annoying parents, dare I say it, where we, a couple of you, where we can work and when we can enjoy that space. So just thinking about the physical space we are in as well. And revision lists, and just being proactive with that. So Miss Hawkes alluded to it earlier. Go in and talking to your teachers. Make sure you know exactly what's going to be in the exams, making sure we have the specification list. Teachers will be happy to provide you with, it might be a link to the specification online, or with a specific to-do list with everything that's going to be covered and what you might need to know. And all the exam boards have to provide that, so it's really easy for the pupils to get hold of. So now would be a really good time, if they don't already know that, to get hold of that information. And a good start for some, if they're not sure where they're at, would be to traffic like that. So to go through green highlighter, amber highlighter, red highlighter, or colours or pens or whatever. And green, if you highlight it, just means you're quite confident with it. Amber, not sure. Red, you've got no idea what those words mean. And that just gives a real simple starting point for revision. So that can be quite useful for some pupils, particularly if they don't know where to start. And it can be quite overwhelming at sometimes when you sit down and you're like, oh my gosh, I've got 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 or 11 GCSEs and I have to revise for them all. So that can be a good starting point. And then there's just a few revision strategies here which we sent out. So again, we've shared all these with the pupils. I'm not going to go through them all now, but I will highlight the last one. I think if you can teach something, it means you know it really well. It means you know it intimately and you know it inside out. So if you are able to stand up here and talk to me about the cardiovascular system or the flow of blood and oxygen in the body, that means you know it really well. Okay, you wouldn't be able to bluff your way through something like that. I wouldn't be able to stand here and talk to you about Pythagoras' theorem. I covered a maths lesson the other day and I tried it and I was out my depth, and it was upper 4 maths and I was struggling. So if you know something really well, you will be able to teach it. So I think that's a really nice way to kind of work your learning towards. But there's a whole host of things there, and as I say, that will be available to you afterwards. I'm going to throw over to Mrs. Minton now, who's going to talk to you a little bit about what you as parents can do to help, and the messages will be encouraging in school and in tutor time as well.
Thanks, Mr. Williams. Firstly, to all of you, and those of you with us now, and those of you watching at home, I just wanted to really formally introduce myself. I've just recently joined Headington. My name is Megan Minton, and I'm really excited, particularly after meeting loads of the upper five recently, to come into not only just the middle school team, but also the PE team as well. I'm really excited to get stuck in with all of the challenges that upper five presents, and working alongside Mrs. Hawkes and Mr. Williams in particular. So I just wanted to highlight a few ways for you as parents, obviously with us working really closely together, some kind of top tips and things that we can do, as Mr. Williams said, just to really get that balance for you as parents as you go through that quite stressful and ever-changing time with your child, but also what other things that your child can do to really help themselves through their journey as they get to the end of their GCSEs. So the first thing that Mr. Williams, like I said, has already mentioned is balance, and we want to ensure that your daughter has got that balance when it comes to routines, so ensuring that their sleep is regularly monitored, that they are sleeping well, they're not staying, we've mentioned phones a lot, dreaded phones, making sure that we're not staying on our phones for too long during the evening. As Mr. Williams said, I actually used to do the same with my mum, give my phone over to make sure that it wasn't distracting me, because we know I've put up a screenshot there about the kind of numbers with regards to our use of screen time, and it can be absolutely phenomenal the amount of time we actually spend looking at screens. Obviously, they can be used for different purposes, but I really would highlight just making sure that our phones, our watches, any type of technology is not there to distract us as we're revising. As a PE teacher, it's really important for me to point out about kind of regular exercise, making sure that we're keeping ourselves nice and healthy. I know that Mr. Williams and Mrs. Hawkes will have talked about that as well with our upper fives. And we'll mention it a lot within our PE lessons as well. But just making sure that we're taking those regular breaks, we're giving ourselves that opportunity, we're encouraging our children to get out, to go for a walk together, and to have that time to just exercise and take some time out. I've even had some thoughts around, Mr. Williams mentioned some yoga. In one of my previous schools, we actually did some glow-in-the-dark hula hooping. So I don't know whether we can get something like that in, just to really help the girls to take some time out and just relax and really have that time to de-stress when it comes to revision. So really importantly, as Mr. Williams said, this is going to be online, so there's some key bits of information here. If you want to take a photo of that slide, this will also be accessible after this talk. Some key email addresses there. At the top is Mr. Williams' email address, second is Mrs. Hawkes. My email address as Pastoral Director of Middle School is third. And then we also have our new Director of Wellbeing, who I'll mention in a second in a little bit more detail as to how we really want to develop that sense of your daughter's well-being and how they are really looked after and cared for as they go through this really important stage of their lives. And just at the bottom there, that is our new SEND lead as well for contact if you need that. So just to introduce Kristen to you, this is Dr. Bourne. She is our new Director of Wellbeing, and I, as a pastoral leader within the school, I'm super excited as to what this new space is going to mean for the students here at Headington. And we know there's been lots of research, lots of information, lots of social media around mental health at the moment and how we can best look after our young children, and it's super important to me that your daughter is looked after and cared for, and we really want to make sure that that happens promptly and swiftly here at Headington. So I, alongside Dr. Bourne, Miss Proctor as well, and the heads of year and Mrs. Hawkes, we really want to make sure that we're establishing those swift responses to the needs that your child is presenting. The Wellbeing Hub is in its formation. There's been so much work that's already gone into the Wellbeing Hub. Lots of painting, sofas, really nice kind of posters, materials that are being brought into the Wellbeing Hub at the moment. But what will that actually look like? So Dr. Bourne, myself and the Deputy Heads, Pastoral, we've been having some conversations about how that space can be best used.
And we also want to get, obviously, some feedback from our students, from your children, as to how they feel that space will be best used for them. And we've talked a lot, particularly for the upper five, about some workshops that we want to put in place really quickly and really swiftly to help them with stress management, with anxiety. We've already talked about some support with regards to exams, particularly even being invited in to see the environment of the exam hall is super key before your daughter will sit her mocks. So it is launching in October, but we have done a lot of preparation and forethought into this as a project. So watch this space for really exciting news that will come out about the Wellbeing Hub. So just some key dates. Again, if you want to take a photograph of this, feel free to. Just some key dates for the upper fives as we go through. And we've already talked a bit about mocks, but we have that study leave and independent revision time right at the start following the Christmas holidays. Mock examinations then will take place from January the 9th until the 20th. We'll then have a parents' evening just to give you that up-to-date and fresh information following those mock exams on February the 7th. And then as a thread and a theme the whole way through this year, as Mrs. Hawkes has already mentioned, we really want to start to think about what the next steps are for your daughter, wherever that may be, whatever route that might be. And we're thinking then on March the 5th about A-level subject choices as well. Learner profiles, do watch out for those over the kind of next few terms, and with your daughter, have a look at those really carefully and clearly. Any questions on learner profiles as we go through the year, please do contact teachers directly, do contact myself, Mrs. Hawkes, Mr. Williams, with any questions that you have around those learner profiles. And then we get, very lastly, to our study leave period before our official exam period in the summer. And that is really all of our key dates. I just want to invite Mrs. Hawkes, Mr. Williams up, and we'll take any questions that you might have. Thanks very much.
Can I just add on to that as well? I think if you're an upper five looking, you're like, oh, that's quite a lot of admin. There's loads of fun stuff happening as well. So socials and prom and all sorts of different bits as well. So it's not just kind of nose to the grindstone, like we're saying, there is lots of balance there. So that's more for your parents' reference. At this moment in time, there will be lots of good stuff going on as well.
I'm just checking online, and we've got 37 people watching. Hello. If anybody has any questions at home, you can just type it in next to the image you can see in front of you. So if any questions come up, we'll check in a minute if anyone has any questions at home. But if anyone has any questions here to start with, to get the ball rolling.
Maybe not.
Or perhaps we've said everything.
That you need to know.
No pressure. Yes.
Compared to the summer exams, what would you typically expect, the sort of value added during the course of this year to be?
It's a very general thing because, of course, it's a difficult thing to answer, and not because I'm trying to be oblique at all. You can often see a grade, sometimes in some cases many more, depending on how well the mock exams went. I think a general expectation of at least a grade would be a way to look at it. But we very much are aware that each of our pupils develop and understand and kind of consolidate and become really confident on material at different stages. And for some, that might be slightly later. So occasionally, of course, we see a huge increase, particularly if they had a bad day. And that's something we've been keen to avoid, that focus on the bad day. I hope that answers the question, yes. Yes?
How much focus should there be on basically going through old exam papers? Is that something that you should leave to you?
So I think, so this is actually probably worth just mentioning now. If I go back to this and we talk about the top 10 strategies, what pupils tend to do is they just get some past papers and they start to look through those, and that is almost their starting point. And of course, it's a very useful thing for them to do, and particularly as it draws closer to the exam itself. But what they should actually be looking to do is obviously constantly sort of refine their knowledge. And the starting point is those varied recreations. They have to be adapting the information, creating something new from it in order to make their brain really kind of manipulate it so they're starting to understand it. And that's why actually those creative revision methods have their place really at the beginning of that revision experience, and then they move towards the past papers. Past papers are excellent practice, but they are no good unless they have really done the work to start with in terms of that malleable attention to each of the topics they're looking at. Flashcards also often completely misused by pupils. What they will tend to do is they will take information from a textbook and then they will rewrite it much smaller on a tiny card, and they will think that that transference of that information, the exactly same information to a smaller space, will somehow by osmosis make it go into their minds. Flashcards are excellent, but they really should be used as flash. So almost that refinement of information, the changing it, the adapting it, the recreating it, the trying it out from memory on past papers. But then flashcards become when they've almost got what we call, when we're talking about revision, is like the memory buttons. So it's that idea that they've refined something down to perhaps the purest mnemonic or a particular symbol or idea. And that in itself then activates a whole wealth of knowledge when they see it. And so that's what flashcards are for. They're not for the transference of information. All of those things which, all of these different forms of resources, they sometimes balk at the idea of doing this because either it feels like too much effort or they go, I'm not an artist. But it's so worthwhile trying. And it's so worthwhile because they have to change. That's why that word change is so important. They have to change the information in order for their brain to engage with it, in order for them to recreate it in some way. And then they will be able to recall it. So repetition and past paper responses do have a space. Sorry, that was an elongated way of saying it, but they shouldn't be all and everything.
I think,
Sorry.
Just on that as well, subject teachers will be really happy to guide pupils towards past papers, be it specific whole past papers or exam questions for X topic.
Yes.
Thank you, that was really helpful, because I'm certainly hearing lots about past papers and I'm going, no, mind maps.
Yeah.
But on that, the other pushback I keep on getting is because obviously I'm from the pre-phones and pre-IT enabled learning era. Is that one can't possibly revise without access to the internet because one needs to have one's iPad with you at the whole time, and that is where without it one can't learn. So I'd just love to hear a bit more from you about that.
I would say there is no reason when they're in the process of active revision for them to be looking at a screen in many ways. It may well be useful to get them started so they're set up and they know what they're looking at. It might be that there is some specific information on Google Classroom. When they're really getting down to it, they should be working on paper and they should be working on one thing at a time, and they should be trying to recreate it, and they should then be trying to apply their knowledge in a practical sense in whatever way makes sense for them. But there isn't any need for them. There certainly isn't any need for them. Never let them tell you they need to be in contact with their friends all the time because their friend will help. They do not need that. As much as I'm proposing the merits of collaborative working in person, and particularly that team energy that comes when they're working together productively towards the end of the process. There's no need for them to be, texting back and forth or, checking in with anybody. And equally, certainly they have Google Classroom, and certainly there are certain resources on there that they may want to refer to, but they do not need to be they shouldn't be interacting with the screen constantly, not at all.
Thank you so much.
Are there any other questions from the room? Yes.
Do I understand then that of the beginning of May they don't go to school anymore?
That's right. So the exams will probably start. We haven't had the timetables from the exam boards yet. We'll get them in a month or so. But the exams usually start around that mid-week of May. So we're looking at probably one of the first exams being on May the 15th. Before that, they will have things like their orals for their languages. They may have they'll have possibly their practical exams for arts, textiles, any of their practical subjects, for example. But the in-sports hall exam papers are likely to start on May 15th. And that means we are allowing them that week from May 8th at home in preparation. They will still have access to school. They can come into school. They can come and revise here all day if they want to. They can make use of the middle school space that I was talking about earlier. They can make use of, you know, their teachers. They can go and see them. Obviously not during their teachers' other lessons, but, you know, that is all available to them. But having that week before they get started, we feel is really important, so they don't feel they're being rushed out of the classroom and straight into exams.
So the subjects like music and art, that's all before the 5th of May.
Yes, practical subjects tend so some of them it's possible. I can't be absolutely, I haven't got the timetable, but all those practical, anything which has a practical element, such as, yes, I suppose music and art, F&N, those sorts of things, they're likely to have already taken place before they go on study leave. So they will have banked all of those. Yes.
2 questions. When do you expect to have the exam timetable? And do you have a date for the middle school prom?
Oh gosh, those are 2 very different questions. The exam timetable is likely to come through in next month, in October. So the different exam boards, I think, published at different times, but we're likely to know fairly soon, within this term. And the prom, yes, right. So we where did I put it? I put it on my shape of the year, didn't I? There we go. So it is, we're looking at, we haven't given it a date, have we? The final exam is usually around the 27th of June, occasionally 28th, but that's the final exam. Then maybe your daughter finishes a week or so before that, depending on which subjects. Physics is often last. I don't know why. Anyway, last but not least. So the middle school graduation prom, which everyone gets very excited about. So I should imagine in the week after that, so maybe a few days after that, maybe either the first week of July or...
Yeah, I think this year group just gone, theirs was the 28th June.
So a day after.
So it's going to be around that. Yeah. But no, definitely.
Yes.
Are they encouraged to do work experience at all, or isn't there enough time between the end of the exams and the end of term?
They are, well, that's a very good question, and I perhaps would be better placed to suggest that I ask the careers advisor that. So if you'll allow me, I will. We haven't, obviously not actually since I've been in this role. Obviously, work experience hasn't been an option, not least because we've been in lockdowns, haven't we? But certainly it's not something that we have put in the calendar for now. Okay.
I suspect as well it's probably on a kind of case-by-case basis, so where that pupil is at in terms of their academia, if they're doing really well and actually could, lose a weekend to do something, or depending on the timing of that and the nature of the work experience as well. But yeah, we don't offer any...
It isn't usually something that we facilitate centrally, but I suppose it would be up to you as parents if you felt that was something you wanted to expose them to. Okay. Have any more questions from... Yes, sorry. I'll come... Sorry, yes, at the back, and then I'll come down here.
You mentioned that, someone could do an A level if they didn't necessarily reach the exact grade in the exam, and the school felt in their work to date had shown that they could do that A level.
Yes.
You'd make that consideration. Would you go outside the school to the board and ask for a remark or...
That's certainly something, that's a very good question actually, when it comes to what we can do, this is probably a little bit lengthier an answer than we've got time for, but if we ever consider that it's a very surprising grade, and we know from the pupil that the exam went quite well, for example, we can actually ask to see those papers, so we can request them from the board and we can look at them as teachers, and then we can make a recommendation to you as a parent, because it actually costs a small amount of money, but to ask for a remark. So if we disagree and we think that actually there is, and occasionally there are moments where people have been harshly marked and we have requested a remark, and occasionally they go up, occasionally they don't. And it's really important, so it's important that we, where possible, try to look at those papers to make sure, particularly if someone's very close to a grade boundary, because if their remark comes back as a lower grade, that stands. So, but that's something we can talk about at the time. But it is the pupil and the parents who do the request. We can certainly advise. luckily there aren't often lots of cases where people don't do as well, but just occasionally it does happen. And to be really clear, it's not that we sort of say, oh well, you know, you've come out with a 3, but we'll let you do physics, which requires a 7. You know, we need to be reasonable about it, and so when we're talking about those sorts of incremental differences, you know, in some cases we've seen people have sort of skimmed the edge of a 7, but they've quite clearly been doing much better, and sort of a 7, 8 or even better through that. And that's, in that case, we feel that we need to honour the way that we have graded them. That doesn't mean in every case that we would just take the mock exams as their results at all. You know, their GCSEs do matter. That's the collection of grades that will be on their CV as they go through life. So I hope that answers the question. Yes. Sorry, Professor Ireland.
So, just a quick one, going back to revision. Is it always unambiguous what pupils are required to memorise in every subject?
Is it always unambiguous?
I'm just thinking back to my time.
Oh,
Needs to be learned.
we give some. So you're the subject teachers. It's not on the pupils to find anything, you know, for themselves. The subject teachers, the heads of department, the leads in the subjects have a very specific oversight of exactly what topics. They don't know exactly which ones they're going to be asked about in the exam, but within that given area. So they will get a thorough revision list of everything that they need to know. We can't guarantee which bits will be picked by the exam board, but we can. It will be very explicit. There's nothing oblique about it, I promise. Yes?
When it comes to the A-level choices, I mean, is that a kind of a process, you know, over these few months where the students get a few chances to talk to
so
different
many
teachers or to their tutors about what they're going to choose?
I'm so glad you asked that, because I realise I slightly skimmed over it to suggest that the only thing that they get is an opt-in conversation. That's really an additional layer. They'll be talking to their tutors, they'll be talking to, obviously, the head of year, but they'll be given a great deal of time to discuss their choices, both one-to-one and small groups, as we approach not just 5 to 6 day, but then next term as we approach the time when we'll be asking them to make those decisions. So yes, it is a multi-layered developmental journey where hopefully, and things do become more clear, I think. Sometimes they change their minds between now and March, sometimes change their minds over the summer as well. We've even had occasions where people have changed their minds on results day and they want to do something slightly different. It obviously becomes a little bit more difficult for us to facilitate, because when they make their choices, we build our timetable around that. And so sometimes it can be quite difficult according to blocking. If they, you know, well, I was going to do physics and maths. I keep talking about physics and maths. I'm an English teacher. I was going to do English and French and history. But then I decided I would do geography and PE and history of art. And that might be slightly more difficult because it's, but essentially we try to make sure that we're guiding them as best as we can to make sure that they're making exactly the right decision for them, so they won't end up having to change their mind at the last minute. And I think also I just want to make the point that we're not making them focus on the next step because we're rushing them through this year, but actually this is a really important conversation to be having around this time, because we really find that it motivates and refines their thoughts about what they need to do now in order to get where they want to go eventually. We're also not telling them they have to suddenly have a career path absolutely mapped out. But just by having these conversations, we do find that it does refocus their energies and sometimes kind of rejuvenate that sense of, you know, what are the targets, what are the things I need to do now, and so yeah, it's a really valuable thing which is going on sort of concurrently.
Just to follow up, is anyone doing 4 A-levels these days, or can you only do 3 now?
Oh no, Many people do decide to start actually with 4 and then sometimes refine to 3. We have a couple of pupils actually doing 5, but I think if one is maths and further maths, I think they almost count as 4 in terms of timetabling. But we don't suggest that as a route for any pupil. And 4 is a tough. It's a tough timetable. I never attempted 4 myself. You know, I knew that my offer from university would require me to have 3. That's still the case. So we want them to make the right decision. And again, so they might we might suggest that they start with 4, try a couple, particularly if their subjects they're not quite sure if they're making the right decision, and then sometimes they will refine again to 3. I'll just check.
Sorry.
Sorry, go on.
Lots of pupils would do 3 in EPQ, so the extended project qualification, which is much smaller than an A level, and still helps them balance their time a little bit as well. So that's quite a good balance as well.
I think I'll just quickly look at the questions that have come in from home. Well, that's weird. I'm looking at myself. When do you expect the timetable to come out? I think we talked about that. So the exam table for the timetable of the summer will be we'll receive it around next month. I think different times according to the different exam boards. Will there be any revision sessions offered in any of the holidays? We haven't done that in the past, and partly I think because it's also really healthy for them to have that opportunity of that break from us, and particularly around those sort of the Christmas holidays, and then of course the Easter holidays. It isn't something we've found necessary to offer, and it certainly hasn't affected the pupils' achievement. Obviously, we give a great deal of guidance, and that final learner profile that you saw at the end of March is a target base from the teachers, so they will direct the pupils specifically to what they should be mainly focusing on, either a topic area or that sort of thing, which should give a great deal of guidance. The other thing is, would you please show again the pics for top 10 revision? Yes, I shall. Here you go. This is live now and it's online and you can look at it anytime, so do feel free. And we will share these slides and the link again on Heads Up this week. So you can, if you're bored on Friday night, you can have another flip through. But so taking through just some of those recoding, the teach it thing, and I'm sorry, because what I might have just condemned you all to is your daughter's teaching you topics throughout your Christmas holidays, but you could make it a fun family quiz. I often suggest that as an option, particularly getting involved. If they are talking to you about what they're learning, if they are trying to, even if it is something they find particularly tricky, please do encourage them to talk it through with you, because actually that process will remind them just how much they do actually know. Because they do. And one of the most significant things is that these people sometimes, they think that they don't. But of course they do. They know so much. And so we just need to reawaken them to that. I think that's all online. Unless anybody has any other questions, there is some wine outside. Sorry to those of you at home. I'm sure you have your own. So I think we will finish there. Thank you again for joining us, both here and at home. And do get in touch if you have any further questions. Have a lovely evening. Thank you.